Karen Miller had never planned to become the center of a small-town scandal, but one Friday night of drinking, reckless confidence, and a chance encounter would change her life forever. It was a warm Friday evening in the quiet town of Clearwater Hills, a place where life usually moved at a gentle, predictable pace. The streets glowed under the soft amber of streetlights as families wrapped up their dinners and neighbors watered their lawns. Tucked to the end of Main Street stood the Blue Lantern Bar, a small but lively spot where locals gathered every weekend to unwind. The hum of laughter and clinking glasses spilled out onto the sidewalk, blending with the faint sound of music drifting from inside. For most, it was the perfect place to shake off a long work week. For Karen Miller, it was an escape she had been craving all day. Karen, 34 and sharp-tongued, was known around town for her big personality. By day she worked as an office manager at a busy insurance agency where endless phone calls and piles of paperwork left her feeling drained. The stress had been building for weeks, missed deadlines, tense meetings, and a recent breakup that gnawed at her every night. Friday nights at the Blue Lantern were her ritual, a way to forget the noise of her daily life. Before arriving, she had already poured herself a couple of strong drinks at home, a private warm-up to what she considered her real night out. She arrived just after 9, stepping through the door with a swagger that came less from confidence and more from the tequila humming in her veins. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup bold, but her eyes carried a restless shine. The bar was crowded but comfortable, filled with familiar faces and the comforting scent of fried food. Karen waved to a few acquaintances and slid onto a stool near the counter, ordering another round before even settling in. The bartender, a patient man who knew her well, raised an eyebrow but poured the drink without comment. As the hours passed, Karen's energy grew louder, her laughter sharper. Each glass seemed to loosen her grip on the day's frustrations. She leaned across tables, interrupted conversations, and gestured wildly as she told half-finished stories. A few regulars exchanged knowing glances but said nothing. They'd seen her like this before, the way her confidence tipped from playful to reckless. Still, she wasn't dangerous, at least not yet. By midnight, the night had taken on a haze. The music thumped a little harder, the room swayed just enough to make Karen feel untouchable. She tossed back another shot, ignoring the soft warnings in the bartender's eyes. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she sensed that she was pushing the limit, but the thought only made her grin wider. For Karen, this was freedom, a chance to be the loudest person in the room, to drown out the quiet fears waiting for her outside the bar. What she couldn't know was that her search for release would soon lead her far beyond a simple night of drinking, pulling her into a chain of events no one in Clearwater Hills would forget. When the bartender finally refused to pour another drink, Karen's excitement soured into a sharp edge of frustration. The cheerful buzz inside the Blue Lantern began to feel suffocating, every laugh and burst of music pressing against her ears. She slid off the bar stool with a wobble, ignoring the faint protests from a group nearby, and pushed through the heavy door into the cool night air. The sudden quiet outside was startling. A damp breeze brushed against her flushed skin, and the neon sign above the entrance buzzed faintly, casting shifting blue light across the parking lot. Karen tilted her head back, breathing in the evening as though the world owed her space to exhale. The parking lot was nearly full, a patchwork of cars glittering under the flicker of aging street lamps. Gravel crunched beneath her heels as she stumbled toward her silver SUV, keys clutched tightly in her fist. She fumbled with the lock, dropping her purse once, then twice, irritation rising with each clumsy movement. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded, the sound threading through the stillness like a warning she couldn't quite hear. Karen cursed under her breath, the alcohol blurring her focus, when a low rumble caught her attention. Across the street, half hidden in the shadow of a broken streetlight, a black sedan sat with its engine idling. The steady vibration of the car seemed to hum across the empty pavement. Karen squinted at the dark windows, her mind spinning in drunken certainty. She was sure she had seen that car earlier, maybe parked outside the bar, maybe creeping along Main Street when she arrived. To her, it felt like a silent challenge, a stranger daring her to look away. The thought flared like a spark in her chest. Instead of climbing into her own vehicle, she veered toward the street, her heels scraping harshly against the asphalt. The air smelled faintly of exhaust as she approached, and the glow from the bar lights stretched long shadows around her feet. With each uneven step, her heartbeat quickened, not from fear but from a reckless rush she mistook for courage. She reached the sedan and yanked hard on the passenger side handle. The door held fast, her blurred reflection in the tinted window stared back at her, eyes bright, mouth set in a defiant line. Inside the sedan, movement flickered, a shape shifted, a flash of pale hands on the steering wheel. Before Karen could process it, the engine roared to life and the car shot forward, tires spitting gravel and a sharp, angry spray. The gust of air it left behind whipped her hair across her face, and she stumbled back, catching herself against a parked truck. The taillights streaked red across the dark street as the car disappeared into the night. For a moment, Karen stood frozen, breath heavy, adrenaline mixing strangely with the alcohol still warming her blood. To her foggy mind, it felt like victory, as though she had chased away some unseen threat. She turned back toward the Blue Lantern, muttering triumphantly, unaware that just a few blocks away a stranger in a black sedan had left chaos behind, a crash of fleeing shadow and a trail of questions that would soon lead straight back to this quiet parking lot. Inside the Blue Lantern, the music had slowed and the crowd had thinned, but outside the night was beginning to shift. Barely 10 minutes after the black sedan vanished, the distant wail of sirens returned, this time louder, sharper, slicing through the stillness of clear water hills. Blue and red lights painted the buildings at the end of the street as the patrol cars turned the corner, their tires crunching across the gravel lot. Karen, still lingering near her SUV with her keys dangling loosely from her fingers, blinked against the sudden glare. Her head throbbed from the mix of alcohol and adrenaline, but curiosity tugged at her through the haze. The officers moved quickly, their radios crackling with clipped updates. They were searching for witnesses to a hit-and-run reported only blocks away. A pedestrian had been struck by a car matching the description of a dark sedan with tinted windows. Witnesses mentioned a vehicle speeding off toward Main Street only minutes earlier. Karen swayed slightly as she watched them fan out across the parking lot, their flashlights sweeping over license plates and shadowed corners. When one beam caught the metallic gleam of her silver SUV, she stiffened, an uneasy shiver cutting through the heat of her drunken confidence. An officer approached, his expression careful but direct. He asked if she had seen anything unusual or heard the commotion on the street. Karen, her words slurred and uneven, launched into a rambling account of the black sedan and how she had confronted the driver. Her voice carried a mix of pride and indignation, every detail exaggerated by the fog in her head. As she gestured wildly, the officer's eyes narrowed. The sedan she described sounded disturbingly close to the vehicle involved in the crash, but her own erratic behavior raised another concern. The smell of alcohol was impossible to ignore. When Karen fumbled for her keys and insisted she was fine to drive home, the officers exchanged a silent glance. Her SUV, a silver model not far off from the reported sedan, suddenly seemed less like an innocent bystander's car and more like a potential lead. They asked her to step aside for a brief conversation. She laughed it off at first, leaning against the door as though the world were a stage she owned. But when one of them politely requested a breath test, the tension shifted. Karen hesitated, her face tightening as the small device was held out in front of her. The taste of tequila still clung to her breath as she exhaled, and the machine beeped sharply, flashing numbers that made the officer's brow crease. Nearly 3 times the legal limit, the parking lot, once buzzing with weekend chatter, fell into a strange quiet as Karen's reality began to close in. Without raising their voices, the officers explained that she was being detained for public intoxication and potential DUI. The cold click of handcuffs around her wrists cut through the night like a final warning. Her SUV remained parked in the glow of the flickering lights as she was guided toward the back of the patrol car. Behind her, the bar's neon sign flickered in steady rhythm, marking the end of a night she had believed she controlled and the beginning of a chain of consequences she could no longer escape. The holding cell was small and stark, the walls a dull gray that seemed to close in with every passing minute. Karen sat on the narrow metal bench, her wrists still tingling from the handcuffs, her head pounding from the combination of alcohol and the sudden shock of authority. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting uneven shadows that made the room feel colder than it actually was. For the first time that night, the chaos she had carried so easily began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of vulnerability she had never felt before. Hours passed slowly. Karen replayed the events in her mind, each detail twisting and magnifying. The confrontation with the black sedan seemed both ridiculous and terrifying now, the adrenaline that had once thrilled her replaced by annoying unease. The sirens, the flashing lights, the questions from the officers, all of it replayed in her head like a film she could not pause. She thought about the people outside the bar, the ones who had seen her stumble and shout, and realized that they might now associate her not with the loud, confident Karen, but with a potential suspect in a serious crime. Then a sharp knock on the door broke the monotony. An officer stepped in, holding a small tablet with a live feed from a nearby security camera. Karen's heart raced as he explained that the footage had captured the black sedan moments after the hit-and-run, speeding down a side street. The driver's figure was clearly visible, fleeing on foot moments later. The officer's words sank slowly into her foggy awareness. The real suspect had abandoned the car, and Karen's drunken interruption in the parking lot had unwittingly delayed the man just long enough for the camera to catch him. The revelation struck Karen with a mix of relief and disbelief. Her reckless behavior, the shouting, the stumbling, the confrontation had accidentally aided the police. She had, without meaning to, created a delay that turned into a critical break in the case. The fugitive, now identified as a wanted criminal with a history of theft and assault, had left a trail that would soon lead authorities straight to him. Karen stared at the screen, blinking past the blur of tears forming at the corners of her eyes. The enormity of what she had narrowly avoided hit her all at once. She could have been blamed, arrested, or worse, had she made a single wrong move. The hours in the cell stretched on as Karen absorbed the details. The initial embarrassment of being detained gave way to a reluctant understanding of how fragile control can be. Her actions, however reckless, had intersected with danger in a way she could never have predicted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night had faded, leaving her raw and exposed, forced to confront the reality of her choices. By the time the morning light began to filter through the high, barred windows, Karen's perspective had shifted. The chain of events was no longer just a blur of alcohol-fueled mistakes. It was a stark lesson in consequences and chance. She realized that her night of chaos had inadvertently helped to stop a dangerous criminal, a fact that would stay with her long after the pain in her wrists and the fog in her head had passed. The small victories and terrifying close calls of that night had left her shaken but aware, a reminder that sometimes even the most reckless actions can intersect with justice in ways no one could foresee. By the time the sun rose over clear water hills, Karen was exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. The holding cell, the handcuffs, and the long hours of waiting had stripped away the bravado she carried so easily the night before. When the officers finally informed her that she was cleared of any connection to the hit-and-run, relief and disbelief collided inside her. The black sedan and the fugitive it contained had nothing to do with her. Yet the memory of the flashing lights, the police questions, and the feeling of being trapped in metal and concrete lingered like a shadow. Karen stepped outside into the crisp morning air, blinking against the sunlight that seemed sharper after the artificial glow of the cell. Her silver SUV was still impounded, parked under the watchful eyes of officers who had collected every detail of her reckless night. The town itself was stirring to life, neighbors opening shutters, early commuters winding down the streets, unaware that chaos had brushed so close the night before. For Karen, the contrast between the quiet streets and the events of hours ago was almost surreal. The fines for public intoxication and the impound fees were hefty, but they felt secondary to the weight pressing on her mind. What lingered most was the sense of vulnerability, the recognition that a night she had thought would be ordinary had spiraled far beyond her control. The fear she had avoided being blamed for a serious crime had shaken her in ways she could not ignore. The experience left her confronting truths about herself she had long ignored. Her drinking had not been harmless, her impulsiveness had put her at risk, and her sense of invincibility had been shattered. Despite the embarrassment and the lingering headache from the alcohol, Karen found herself reflecting on the unexpected consequence of her actions. The black sedan and the fleeing fugitive might have slipped from the scene unnoticed if she hadn't intervened in her chaotic, drunken way. Somehow, her reckless confrontation had delayed a dangerous criminal just long enough for police to gather crucial evidence. The realization was bittersweet. The same recklessness that could have ruined her life had, paradoxically, helped prevent further danger in her community. The rest of the day passed slowly. Karen kept to herself, replaying the night in her mind with a clarity she had never had before. She considered her life the stress, the broken relationships, the nights spent drinking to escape reality, and understood, perhaps for the first time, the fragility of the choices she made. The wake-up call was harsh but undeniable. The town, now buzzing with the story of her drunken antics, and the criminals she had unwittingly helped catch, seemed to look at her differently, though she barely cared. What mattered was the lesson etched deep into her mind. Recklessness and alcohol could be a dangerous combination, but awareness and change could follow if she allowed them. By evening, Karen had begun to make decisions she might never have considered before. The memory of the flashing lights, the sirens, and the cold metal of the handcuffs lingered as more than embarrassment, they were warnings. She realized that her life could not continue on the same chaotic path, that the exhilaration of a night like this could easily turn into disaster. For the first time, she felt a quiet determination to face her problems, to confront the habits that had led her here, and to reclaim control over her own life. The night she had feared would be remembered only for humiliation had instead become a turning point, a moment where reality forced its way in and refused to let her ignore the consequences any longer.